Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. MinnMax is a place about games, friends, and getting better. My name is Ben Hansen. Thank you for being here. Today's interview is from the MinnMax studio, by the way, and it's with Wade Rosen, the CEO of Atari. We talk about his journey of becoming CEO, what that's like. Is it fun? Is it stressful? What is it like to be the CEO of a legendary company like Atari? We talk about the state of the game industry, how to avoid massive layoffs, which are happening all over the place, you might have noticed. The Atari Recharge titles, the strategies moving forward, all that good stuff. We hope you enjoy this discussion, and you can help support independent games media directly by unlocking the podcast version of this discussion and all of our other interviews at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. If you support us at that $5 tier, you get access to the bonus podcast feed. Also, an early version of the MinnMax Show podcast every week without ads. Our bonus podcast, Party Chat, podcast versions of The Deepest Dives, which are our huge community game clubs. We're going to be doing Alan Wake 2 very soon. Ton of benefits over at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. But it's always free to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. But without further ado, here is Wade Rosen. Wade Rosen, welcome to MinnMax.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
In the studio.
Yeah, the glamorous MinnMax studio.
If only people could see what's happening behind the camera, I think they'd be horrified. But thanks for joining me. You're in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very quintessential Minnesota basement, so I think it's only appropriate that this be where we're conducting the interview. It reminds me of home.
Yeah, it feels like a nice place to like get a beanbag, play some JRPGs. It's kind of that vibe is what we're going for.
A lot of Dreamcast in basements.
Oh man, the place for Dreamcast is in basements. Yeah, I was very surprised. This interview has a weird route. I don't know how much you want to get into and stuff. But long story short is my wife was in a new parenting class and she was in it with your sister. And then somehow that came up. Yeah. Of like, oh, my husband's in video games. Oh, my brother's in video games. And then so my wife came home and then she's like, hey, do you know the CEO of Atari? And I was like, Wade? Because I just played through Atari 50 and loved him. Like, I remember that dude's name because I remember thinking that guy seems younger than I thought he'd be.
Yeah. You're like, why is that guy the CEO? That's probably the first question that crosses people's minds.
I think so. And that's what you're here to answer for, I think, is why are you the CEO? But in general, people are probably surprised that you live mainly in Minneapolis.
Definitely,
you have a house in Minneapolis. How do you phrase that?
This is home for me. And I also think it's a very Minneapolis thing that our like families ran into each other doing yoga. Like that that gets about as Minnesota as you can get there. And it was new parent class. But yoga, new parent class is even more Minnesota probably.
I think so, yeah.
And I live in Minnesota and I love it. It's great.
How long have you been here?
I grew up in Minnesota, but then I left at 18 and said I was never coming back. And then 5 years ago, I came back.
So. Really? What was that decision to finally come back home?
Well, I grew up in a rural community in southern Minnesota. So when I said I wasn't going to come back, it was very much, that had been, I was 18 and just didn't really want to be in a small town anymore. And I think like all sea turtles, when we reach a stage in our life, we decide we want to start a family. We want to come home and like raise a family in our home. So Minnesota started looking pretty good again. That's nice. And I got to live in Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, which is a really dope metropolitan area.
Yeah. Now, were you following your sister's lead by coming back here?
No, I beat her by like 4.5 years.
Nice.
So
Nicely done,
she was
man.
in New York for a long time. And then just like another sea turtle, family call. When she was ready to start a family, Minnesota started looking pretty good.
So, I mean, it's that idea of big family business, right? That your parents were involved with?
Yeah, agribusiness. Okay. Yep.
Okay. And part of you wanting to leave small town Minnesota life behind was like, I never want to be involved in that business.
Yeah, there was certainly a part of that. I think also anyone who's grown up in a community, well, there's lots of growing up in a small town, because a lot of my love for video games comes from growing up in a rural community, because there is so little stimuli. You're left with your imagination, you're left with books and movies, and in my case, also video games. And so it was a really formative part of my childhood. And I think the desire to not come back was just like being ready for like larger places. I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to live in big cities. I wanted to do all these fun things that I feel really grateful that I had the opportunity to do.
Yeah. What was the small town, by the way?
Fairmont.
Fairmont.
So not to be mistaken with Faribault for all the Minnesota listeners.
Please, and this is the place really to dive into Minnesota stuff. It's in our name.
I know I'm leaning into it. I would never do this on any other podcast.
You can let more of an accent slip than you've ever had it before, whatever you want, man. Yeah, I grew up by Wilmer. It's like 100 miles west of Minneapolis here and whatnot.
Yeah. Oh yeah. For sure.
I figure. Okay, so you were ready to leave. You decided to come back. That's the weird thing about Minnesota. And this isn't just a promotional video for Minnesota, I swear. But like, you know, I was at Game Informer for 9 years and was really lucky to travel the world every month for our cover stories and do video interviews with developers. So I was happy to see a lot of the world, and it was a weird feeling then to be like, yeah, I still choose Minneapolis. I don't know if I'm just being stubborn, but like I am excited to live here the rest of my life.
Well, I think there's I heard somebody once describe Scandinavia as like a beautiful melancholy that I oftentimes associate with the upper Midwest, but definitely Minnesota. And it's really nice if you can travel. It's like a nice place to come back and get your like Minnesota Midwestern energy refilled, like here, and kind of recharge after you fly to LA or New York. Amazing, also amazing places I really enjoy being in. And then I get to come back here and be around a bunch of trees and water and stuff and get ready to go do it again. Do
you feel like that's more and more common for CEOs to be like, you know what, I can go live wherever I want. I don't need to worry about being in the heart of a big city here?
Maybe. Well, this is a big city, but
not New York and LA.
Not New York and LA. Not a megalopolis. Yeah. I think so. I think part of it for us though is we're so remote that I actually need to get to Paris frequently and New York and SF and LA, in addition to, a lot of other Germany for Gamescom and other places. And I would argue this is the best country the best airport in the country. And so
they certainly tell you that a lot. They're very proud
they're really.
Yeah.
But I, having lived in Denver for a long time, which is Colorado's an amazing state. That airport has become dystopic. It's like 45 minutes out there. Every time I'm that's where I was living before coming here. I'm always like, oh yeah, it's nice to be 15 minutes away from it and through security in 5 minutes and like at my gate. So I'm like, I live on airplanes. And if you're doing that, this is a nice place to live. It's a nice place to spend your downtime.
Yeah. You're going to France a lot.
I am.
What's happening in France?
Well, technically Atari is, based out of Paris. It's a French company because it was acquired by Infogrames through an acquisition of Hasbro Interactive in 1999.
Okay.
And so that's how Infogrames acquired the Atari IP, and then I think roughly 5 years later rebranded themselves Atari.
Right.
So it's really, there's a lot of history inside of the modern day Atari. It's not just Atari. It's obviously Infogrames, it's Hasbro Interactive, it's Accolade, it's GT Interactive, it's Ocean, it's Beam, Melbourne House, these like major studios, and really these Microprose at one point in time, even Gremlin. So studios that I like grew up with and think back on so fondly. I'll kind of pass through the Atari doors. I mean, people don't oftentimes realize this, but like Civilization was owned by Atari for a period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And any chance you'd ever get it back?
No, I don't think
you ever go knock on 2K's doors? If they're willing to give up that cash count?
Seems to, like, I mean, that would be amazing. I guess never say never, right? Like, we as a company, we really like when we make acquisitions or find partnerships, we try to find people who are doing something better than anyone else in the industry, even if that's a very niche thing. Like Nightdive would be a really good example of that. That's a very niche segment of the market, but they are really fit into our wheelhouse because they're excellent at it. They're the best at what they do, and they have a retro focus that's innovative. So
okay, there's a lot to dive into, but let's night dive into this right now. So the Nightdive thing, I think. When did you all purchase Nightdive? It's pretty recent, right?
Yeah, it happened earlier this year.
Okay. Was that something you were pushing for, something that bubbled up naturally?
No, that was proactive on my part. Yeah. Yep. And
are you just a big System Shock fan? Where's that coming from?
Well, I had known Nightdive for a very long time. I actually, yes, System Shock, I think preliminarily. And then, I'm trying to think whether it was Blood or what was the game. But I remember probably about 4 or 5 years ago, wondering about all these games that I played when I was young. And I'm like, who owns these? Like, what's happening with these? And I started researching it, and not all of them, but a bunch of them. I'm like, who is this Nightdive company? And like, why are they putting out Turok? And why are they putting out like, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream,
right,
and Wizardry 8, and like, just like really good games that I was like, so I called them up and like, we hit it off, and we just became close after that. So I had been talking to them for a really long time. And then of course, System Shock, huge fan of System Shock 2, and was just really impressed with what they were doing. And I think, for them, it's a desire to remain creative and to do really innovative things. But people don't realize this. Like when you're running a company, it's not like the whole day you're getting to like think about fun ideas or you've got paperwork to do. You've got HR and legal and accounting and IT infrastructure to think about. And so, something we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we protect the creativity of Nightdive and, any company that's a part of Atari, but also to lift off those burdens so that they can focus even more on making great games and just doing what they do really well. So yeah, offloading some of the non-value add, really demanding things and allowing them to focus on their value added pieces.
Yeah. I think it's like, the System Shock stuff they've been working with for so long, you've been hearing about it for so long, that I feel like it was really this year. And so good timing on your part, where suddenly it was like, wait, what is Nightdive doing? I think it was like the double whammy of like the Quake 2 remaster, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And then the Star Wars Dark Forces
that
they're working on. It's like, okay, how are they doing?
Don't forget Turok 3. Just to give a little of course shout out for this November, Turok 3.
Look, and this is I'm sure a messy topic, but like acquiring a studio that's so great at remastering a game like Dark Forces.
Yeah.
That just feels like it's being split 7 ways to Sunday for, okay, Disney gets this chunk of the money, Atari gets this chunk of the money. Like, isn't it just a mess to have a studio that's working with so many other publishers?
Well, I mean, we're just, they're an independent company, so we're just a part of they're not splitting it with us, I guess is what I would say. They're just they're a whole company, and they're just responsible for their piece. But yeah, it is expensive to work with series like Turok or, Dark Forces or things like that. But ultimately it's worth it because they're really foundational and critical games in the history of video games. Dark Forces has been a surprise for me because it was a game that I was aware of it, but I hadn't actually played it. So I thought, oh yeah, we'll get a response. I actually thought Turok 3 is the one I'm a little bit more excited about, just because I played the first two and I remember trying to play 3 and I'm like, what is this? It's like so slow and it like kind of felt like Half-Life 2, and I could see what they were going for. Like Half-Life, and I could see what they were going for, but I'm like, this is trying to do Half-Life on a N64. Like it's breaking. Like it broke almost immediately.
Yep.
And then I saw what they were doing, and I'm like, this is unrecognizable, and it's beautiful, and it's kind of a cool. There's really something interesting and cool and innovative beneath that. And so Turok 3 for me is almost a historical game. Dark Forces, on the other hand, I'm blown away by the interest in that and just the general response. So, I think Nightdive, they have two teams. One that is the Kex team that does all the remasters, and then they have their Shock team, which built System Shock and is continuing to work on that game and produce additional content for it and work on the console ports. And
I'm fascinated by you saying they're an independent company.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still confused with that idea. You're acquiring them. Is it kind of like a Sony Bungie situation where you want to stay as separate as possible? Or
well, I mean, we all work together and things like that, but it's not one of those things where it's like, okay, now you're acquired, like pay the toll, like kick up a bunch of money. Okay. Like ultimately you want them to be as successful as possible, and we're all pushing in the same direction. But it's their job just to continue to do whatever they can creatively to move the needle. And and we step in and help in ways that that otherwise would be redundant.
So they're becoming masters of remasters here, doing so much. I think
they are the masters of remasters.
Yeah, I mean, Blue Point had it for a while. They're slowing down a little bit. Who knows what they're doing now at Sony? But
certainly the masters of the the FPS remaster.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right. But then again, I mean, they're just studying all these old games. A lot of tech talent in there. I mean, do you think about their future? Would you ever go knock on the door and be like, do you want to just make a new version of some old IP or create your own game? Or do you think keeping them...
at Nightdive?
Yeah.
Oh, it's all on the table. It's all on the table. And so for all of that, we sit down together and we talk about like, you know, there's kind of the remaster team and then the Shock team, which did, you know, System Shock, which is a remake, but really a new game. Like, yes, it's using the blueprint of the original, but I mean, anyone who's played that game, it's built from the ground up. It might as well be a brand new game, and there's so much that they redid. So, it's constantly trying to find that balance. But I think also with some of these teams, you know, part of the beauty of being in a larger company is you don't necessarily need to be constantly growing to survive. You just need to be doing what you do really well. You know, it's not. That's, I think, ultimately. What makes a successful acquisition is, you know, you don't have to carry everything. It doesn't have to be, you're not putting the company on your back and carrying it across. You're just getting to do your part of a larger whole. And for Nightdive, that means being free to work on really big projects, but also some like kind of weird, esoteric, strange ones that they might want to, which I obviously have things in mind, but I can't say them at this point. I don't want to ruin that. But, you know, so for every big game, there's also like weird fan favorites. Like Power Slave was not a super well-known game. And I know that was one that Steven cared deeply about and wanted to put out. And it turned out to be a really cool, interesting title and probably exposed a lot of people to something they didn't even know before. Yeah.
Okay, you hinted at something which is the crux of everything that I want to talk about with you.
Please.
You talk about just thinking about the games that you loved as a kid, thinking about the Turok series. What's going on? Who owns this IP? That's the part that's most fascinating to me is you're a younger guy. Sorry, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. You become CEO of Atari, and then you sit back and say, now, how do I recapture my youth? Like, is that... okay, what is that process like? You just literally are like, what do I do? Well, CEO for a legendary publisher. Let me think about the games that I used to love and see if there's any wiggle room for that.
Yeah, I think that's a part of it. I think the hardest thing when you step in is not to do 100 things right away, and instead to really understand what's going on. Because the things that I thought were really important sometimes turn out to be not as important as I thought. And some of the IP that like I remember fondly, but then as I've gotten to know it better, have turned out to be really critical, and you know, we want to focus on that. So sometimes I know it can feel like, oh, Atari, why don't you do this, and this? But even once you make a decision, you know, it takes months developing the ideas or like the 2600 Plus is something we've been working on for a really long time. It wasn't like something we put together the month before. And so but I think there's a couple themes. The first is we wanted to find a way to make retro content more accessible. And that's as much about preservation as it is about just supporting Atari games. I think, you know, if we view this as an art form, which I certainly do, a part of art is its accessibility and preservation.
And so that's you coming in first week and trying to reshift priorities, or you feel like Atari was already shifting in that direction of
I think that was something, good question. I think that was something that was important to me, but I don't know that I certainly didn't come in the first week and said like, we're going to focus on like preserving video games, you know, because it wasn't clear. Like first, that's like a really noble thing to do, but it also has to be, you know, a viable business model. And over time, like it remains to be seen because nobody's really done it, but we think that there's a way to do that and operate on a larger scale. So that's something we'll continue to pursue.
Okay. And that means just the Recharge series, or what does that mean for you?
Well, even Nightdive, right? So I think, you know, every game you look at I think all games deserve to be accessible. What that accessibility means varies based on the game. So for some, it's just like, okay, this is a game that exists and can be played. For others, it's a it's a port to different platforms. For others, it's a remaster. For others, it's a remake or continuing the series, even in some cases. But finding what works in all those situations, it takes time. So Nightdive's a part of that. What we're doing with Atari, like Atari 50 would be a really great part of that. So sometimes it's not about how do I preserve this individual game. It's more about how do I make all of these games or like a collection of these accessible and tell the historical context behind it.
Yeah.
Because it's not, playing Asteroids is fun, but like understanding like what went into it is a lot more enjoyable.
Right.
Sword Quest, I'd never really enjoyed Sword Quest until like I like got to play the DE. They made their kind of fourth game and then got to see the videos and the designer talking about and Todd Fry talking about it. And I was like, oh yeah, this guy's the best. Like now I really like this. So
yeah,
I think all of those things, Digital Eclipse, for example, did a Karateka.
So good.
Yeah. And that's a great example of sometimes, had that just been re-released, especially if it was emulated, because the hardware, that specific hardware is tough to emulate, but probably wouldn't have been that impactful. But when you see it in the context of what it was,
right,
it's really amazing. Now, does every game need that, or is it even feasible? Probably not. But I think that'd be a good example of like, first and foremost, preservation and finding a way to do it that's commercially viable.
So the whole Atari 50 project, which is one of my favorite games from last year, we had a whole debate about whether it counted as a game when we did our top games of the year. It was a whole thing for us.
I'm going to say yes, but I'm biased. So
I say yes as well. Anyway, so with that, was that something that just happened to align really well with the direction you wanted to go in? Because when you started, 2021 you came
2021, yep.
Okay,
yep.
That's probably around the same time that they were starting to think about Atari 50?
Yeah, we were thinking about it. And
so you guys kind of got the ball rolling and reached out to Digital Eclipse? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I had a mutual friend. The SNK 40th was actually what inspired us to go talk to Digital Eclipse.
Okay.
And I spoke with Mike Mika over there, who's just like an amazing guy. And anyone who meets Mike is always really, really walks away with just a true lover of games. And I said like, I was impressed with SNK 40th. I want to do a 50th. And he said, hey, I've got this idea and I've been pitching it to studios and they've all said no, because it's kind of expensive and it's a little weird and people don't think it's necessary. And he said like, I want to go interview people and I want to put all the games on a timeline. And immediately I was like, oh my gosh, we could have branching timelines and we could have like secret timelines. And he's like, all good ideas, but we got to do this first. And I was like, that's fair. But I mean, immediately I was sold. I didn't even need to be convinced. It was so obvious to me in my head that like, hey, it's not enough to play these, to actually have an interactive story to go along with it. Yeah. And from there, it just, it took off and we never looked back.
Okay. With Atari 50, I mean, how much are you digging into the archives at Atari? I know the name Atari is all over the place. You got through with infograms, everything like that. But are there like Atari archives that you get to open up for the folks at Digital Eclipse, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, a lot of it's, Atari's so, like what we covered in 50 is pretty well known beyond what a lot of the devs talked about. But there certainly are archives. I think the hope is that we don't stop just at 50, right? I would love to go deeper and, learn more about Jaguar or Lynx or, Atari ST, which is, one of the few things that we didn't cover in really any, like in meaningful depth in Atari 50, just kind of some brief mentions. And that's sort of where the archives open up. That's where you get into the little bit of the nitty gritty. A lot of what was covered in 50 are not always stories that were known, but it's more, it is hitting the high level stuff and then really diving into like fun, anecdotal. It's more like what was it like to be there on the ground is probably the beauty of that. Yeah.
And do you want to explore more of that kind of later Atari history
Absolutely.
On your own? Or are you saying this is round 2 with Digital Eclipse you'd be open to?
I mean, either way, I think we're huge fans of Digital Eclipse and we would really like to do more projects with them. And I think we will be doing more projects with them in the future. I think regardless, it just showed us that there's a there's an appetite to not only for, I think the other surprise is when we actually had Jaguar games on there, how positively people respond to that and how excited they were about having Jaguar titles. And it was like, okay, well, maybe we should go in a little bit more into Jaguar. Maybe we should open it up. Maybe we should extend it beyond just the original manufacturing timeline and look at like this really vibrant homebrew scene that is continue to exist for over 2 decades afterwards.
Right.
JagFest, which eventually became the Milwaukee. I think JagFest turned into the Milwaukee Retro Gaming Fest.
Oh,
right?
really? I know that.
I think so.
Okay.
It started as like a Jag homebrew, something like one of the big festivals started as a Jaguar homebrew festival and eventually morphed into a more holistic retro festival. But yeah.
Where you say, you're seeing people pop hard for this Jaguar content. Where are you seeing that? Is that people tweeting at the Atari account being like, way to go?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Sometimes it's comments, it's tweets, it's, we read all the reviews, it's Discord, kind of all the social media outlets that you would think. We if you're posting something in Discord, we're probably we pay attention to it all.
Sure,
that's
the
what
Atari Discord. Sure,
I'd say, which is like YouTube's big too, and we're just taking stock and trying to listen to the community and listen to the community with that while still having a sense of what we want to do and not letting it whipsaw us back and forth or anything. Yeah.
And then were you also champion of, you all bought AtariAge, kind of the fan site, or how do you define AtariAge?
So AtariAge, AtariAge was something that, Al over there is one of the preeminent Atari historians. And it just made sense to bring it into the fold because it's such a great, as we're starting to rebuild I think one of the things that we want to do in addition to preservation, the other one was like innovative retro. So there's preservation, which can fall under innovative retro, but oftentimes when we think of retro, it's like very, very like by the numbers in a box. It like looks and is kind of the same it's always been. The innovative side of it is to say, okay, well, we're going to release the 2600 plus. It'll play, it's digital, it's HDMI output. It'll play 2600 and 7800 games. But shouldn't we get some new content to go with this? If we're releasing this now, shouldn't we treat this as a living ecosystem? So it's also a desire to go back and look at these early platforms, not as, hey, they existed between this date and this date, but that they continue to exist. And in a world where we have near infinite complexity, there's a place for something really simple that you can turn on and jump into immediately and play and have fun with.
But still let the community go get some more homebrew stuff on there? Is that part of it?
Absolutely. We do. We're looking to source some of the new content from the community. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so buying a thing like AtariAge, it's a fascinating idea of just kind of absorbing the fan site. Like what does that get you? Just more insight or...
Well, I mean, it gets us certainly insight. It brings in, some talented people as well. It brings in another outlet to test titles. So AtariAge is kind of like a proving ground. There was this program, the Atari Program Exchange or the Atari, I think it was APX, I want to say. But there was a program for the Atari 8-bit where people could make homebrew games and then sell them. It was really like the first storefront back in the early 80s. And it gave rise to some really amazing games, Caverns of Mars and things like that.
Oh, really?
Came out of it. Yeah. Huh. And, the desire is for a place that is a little bit more all-encompassing and experimental and like without having to put the Atari label on everything. How do we make an environment where people can put out their content and have like really interesting experimental content, and then occasionally some of the best stuff rising to the top and probably getting a larger release.
Sure.
And then I guess on the other side, there's AtariAge also has some production capacities some operational capacities that were interesting for us too.
Can we go back in time a little bit?
Please. Well, it depends on how far, but yeah. Let's do it.
We don't have to go too far. How did you end up in this role?
Well, initially I was on the board at Atari and
starting
about a year before I took over as CEO.
And that was just a matter of you love video games. What's
exactly.
some way in, and then that popped up somehow.
I had the opportunity to invest in Atari and became a major shareholder, and I took a board seat at that point in time. And then about a year in, the board asked me if I wanted to step in as CEO.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very simplistic version. There's gotta be okay, so you're on the board of this legendary company, and are you on fire thinking of ideas for the future? Like, are you just saying, God, if we would just go this direction, I feel like we could wrangle all these things together? Was it a frustrating experience to be on the board but not in charge?
There's moments where, you have an idea where you want the company to go and you want them to focus on that. I also was running a separate company, an entirely different company. It was what originally brought me to Minnesota because it was a biotech division, and it was in medical device, which is obviously one of our largest industries here in the Twin Cities. So that, I was much more in a board functioning capacity at that point in time. I think when I was asked, I had to make a really hard decision on whether to step out of this company that I still have a lot of faith in and try to help with, but it basically was choosing passion over career to some degree. For most of my career, I've focused on market opportunities, or hey, what's the I'd started several tech companies before this, and kind of thought, well, what's the best market opportunity, or what's the best growth advantage? How fast can we grow? And this was more, I love video games. It's been a constant in my life, a constant passion. And I felt like this was something that I could do for decades. And I had never felt that before. And so I rearranged most of my life to be able to step in and take on the role.
Is it fun?
Absolutely.
Really?
Is it joyful all the time? Right. For the most part, but joy is
joyful all the time for the most part.
Joy, I really enjoy it. And I think it's hard for me to stop at the end of the day, which is a good sign. Not because I'm I got so much work to do, but because I could keep going and going. It is very fun. There are moments of frustration, obviously. But on the whole, we get to do super interesting things with people that we really respect and care about. My team is amazing. The Nightdive team is amazing. I feel just so fortunate for the people I get to do this with. And a lot of fun comes from that. Now add on the fact that I get to work in my passion and do things that are inherently creative and add to the creation of art. That's about perfect. What else could I ask for?
Was it intimidating to leave the tech world, biotech world, and come into the world of video games? Do you feel where do you go for resources on management in the video game industry world?
That is the most challenging part, right? So most of the people that I know and trust and that I've worked with came from traditional technology. And in terms, I know a lot about video games in terms of history and games and what, industry trends, things like that. But as far as the actual ins and outs of the industry, that was probably the biggest learning curve, and it's still occurring in candor. But I think that's one where, as long as you care and you show that you care and you're in it for the right reasons, it's a pretty accepting industry. I think the challenge with video games is it can smell someone who's inauthentic.
Sure.
If anyone gets a feel, even a hint that you're disingenuine about what you're doing, they will turn on you. And
within the company or
within the industry,
okay.
I think. But I think if, and that goes for everybody who's joined the company, a lot of those people don't come from the industry. They're very, they're professionals, they're talented, they bring a lot to the table. They also care deeply. And I think people get that and can see that. And so it's been pretty welcoming and pretty easy to get involved. I've also witnessed times when people are in it for the wrong reasons. And
within Atari, or just seeing other folks in the
just
industry?
Out in the industry, and you can kind of sense it,
Sure.
there are these, kind of fads that sweep through industries. And
you can say Web3. It's okay.
Well, AI is the big one right now, right? Sure. Like you gotta mention AI in your earnings reports, or so kind of, and before that it was free to play, and before that it was mobile, premium mobile, then free to play mobile, then now,
right.
And these things sweep through, and you're kind of like watching people chase it, and it's just, I think those are the wrong reasons to be. Not that those things are inherently wrong, or any of those things are wrong, if that's what people genuinely care about. But most of the time, that's not, and people sense it.
And so you're just having these discussions in hotel bars, you're having meetings with people, and you can just smell just an avalanche of BS.
Well, I mean, it's more whether people are open for us. And I think one of the reasons, it's a lot of pressure to be the CEO of Atari. And I think my executive team feels that as well, to be leaders of Atari, and a lot of skepticism on top of that. A lot of years where people have maybe felt disappointed about what we've done and how we've represented the brand. And so, of course, natural skepticism, you're having to like reframe that. But as we've just continued to like do the best we can, the narratives change pretty quick. It's not so much conversations at the bar. It means articles. It's, again, like messages, it's community.
I mean, I couldn't imagine just the hardcore Atari fan base. Maybe this is simplistic from their point of view, but like a project like Atari 50,
right?
That's just such a clear line in the sand, putting a flag up, being like, hey, everybody, we care about this stuff to some extent here.
Well, I'm sure there was some complaining somewhere, but yes, for the most part, I think that was the big turning point. I think that was probably the biggest turning point, I think.
And that's pretty recent, man.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the 2600 plus has been really well received. I think bringing Nightdive in, people, that was one people got. They were like, okay, that makes sense. We get I think people were afraid that we were going to like old Atari the thing, or, just kind of rip out the soul, or like force them to do only Atari games or things like that.
Right.
Which that's, hey, understandable why there's concern there. But once that fear died down, people realized like, oh, this is a part of that larger innovative retro strategy, and really we're just trying to do something really well, better than anybody else in the industry. And that's ultimately, I think that's all you can do.
Yeah. Looking, from the 30,000 foot view, it seems like you all are on kind of a hearts and minds crusade.
Yeah.
Like I see so many cool releases of like, hey, do you care about quantum? Quantum recharged, everybody. Like, sure. I mean, there are
deep cut for sure.
I thought because I enjoyed it in Atari 50. It stood to me, so I saw that recharge thing pop up. Like, all right, I want to play that. So I played it when it came out a little bit. But it seems like a lot of those types of deep cuts of like haunted house fans, everybody, and those people I'm sure are enthusiastic, but. I do look. We don't need to get too dour, but I look at it and I get scared from the outside. Just like, what are they expecting from these projects?
I know.
Are you disappointed with like not an avalanche of sales coming in for every one of these cool, no doubt cool little releases of kind of rebooting old franchises?
Well, I mean, we're trying to figure out what works. So but we don't take a lot of risks that we try to take very minimal, or we try to take risks that aren't going to jeopardize the company, because that's how continually betting the house is not a way to like drive a sustainable business. We're not trying to hit home runs. We're trying to hit singles and doubles, we always say. So it's like
Moneyball strategy. Some would say.
A little bit, it doesn't have to be, and to play the long game, right? Like, so the recharge titles, what they sell is important, but they're also, I mean, Centipede, Missile Command, Asteroids, these things are still relevant today. And like, let's say somebody wanted to put that on, wanted to put that in a device somewhere. We were having to give them 40-year-old games, 40-year-old plus games. At some point in time, we had to say like, hey, we've got these games. I mean, those recharged versions, these recharged titles are going to be used for decades. We're still using them. Even the first ones we released, they're timeless. They're amazing, but we can commercialize them in a lot of different ways.
What does that mean, other than just putting them on consoles?
Well, a lot of it's
Steam
licensing, So like Arcade 1-Up is a really good example, like, well, we've already got Asteroids on there. We've already got Centipede. We've already got those things. at some point in time, people are going to want more innovative ways to play those games. And so that gives us another opportunity to license those or to put those in hardware.
Sure.
As far as a game like Haunted House, I mean, it's, you're taking risks, but what we usually do is we try and find studios we like. Little Orbit was a kind of an indie darling that we liked, and we thought they'd done some nice projects, and they came to us and we said, hey, what do you guys want to do? So Haunted House that was their choice. That was actually, we also announced Lunar Lander Beyond.
Yeah.
That is Dreams Incorporated. That was their choice. We didn't
say,
made
Chris Tales, right?
Yeah, they did Chris Tales. Okay. Yeah. And would I have ever thought they were going to pick Lunar Lander as the title they wanted to work on? So a part of this is finding devs that we like, saying, guys, like, what do you want to do? Like, which one? Because the belief we have is if you let people pick the one they're the most passionate about, you're going to get the best product. So,
and if you just keep the budget low enough, you're not draining the bank at Atari to make these cool versions of old games forever.
Yeah. I mean, we make sure that the budget's meaningful enough to have like a really cool, awesome game, but also not so much that it's like, okay, we're going to bet the house here.
Right.
And if this doesn't work, the company's going to go under. Like, because we see that a lot, right? There's a lot of, you see that all the time where a company's kind of at a place where like a single game will make or break the company. Like the goal, I mean, my hope is that we're never in a place where that's the case. And each of these are an attempt to figure out really what the long-term strategy looks like. As far as Recharge goes, the way it typically works is we do one more famous title and then a deep cut, and a more famous title and a deep cut. So we did Quantum, and then I think just today we announced Berserk Recharge.
Yeah, that's right.
So a little bit more of a well-known title, a little bit more of a little bit, more in the forefront. The next one will probably be a little bit more of a deep cut.
That's
if the pattern holds.
All right. Look, I'm sure this is a more complicated question than you could possibly imagine, but Atari at the moment, sustainable, profitable?
Well, we're a publicly traded company, so it's all available. We are not a profitable company. That said, well, actually, I given that it's a public company, I can't speak to that too much. But all the information is available out there, and at the moment, no, it's not profitable.
Okay. And are there frequent meetings about, look, we don't want to bet the whole company on something, but we need some Hail Mary to land. Let's keep lobbing them.
Oh, I mean, we're not throwing Hail Marys, but we're constantly trying things, figuring out what works. Atari 50 is an example of a project that works.
Yeah.
So, what do we do from there? That's not just copying and pasting, but continuing to push the modality and continuing to like evolve that into something even more cool and meaningful. That would be a very logical conversation for us to have.
Okay. And again, this is simplistic, so forgive me.
No, please.
Pie chart. Give me the pie chart. Where's the money coming from that's flowing into Atari right now? What's like a bigger part of the pie than we would think? All that good stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's revenue and then there's net. Again, all available, publicly available documents.
Sure.
But it breaks down mostly between three major quadrants, which are games, hardware, licensing. Okay. Those are the three major ones.
And even of those three, can you give any balance for like which is the bigger?
It kind of shifts quarter by quarter.
Okay.
If you have a hardware release, that'll obviously push that higher in those quarters. If you have a successful game, that'll push that higher. And then licensing's pretty steady. But it's roughly a third. And then there's some other income that we have as well in some other parts of the business. But those are the main three. I would say those are the three big drivers.
Okay, gotcha. This licensing world,
mm-hmm.
That's stuff like Arcade 1-Up.
Arcade 1-Up, T-shirts, obviously.
Okay.
Kiriyama shoes, Lego,
right?
Watches. We did some Fossil watches last year.
When you get to be the CEO of a company, do you get to just look at the books for something like the Lego involvement for the 2600 set and just be like, well, it's more than I thought, or that's less than I thought? Which direction is that one going?
Oh, I can't give any information on that.
Okay.
But what I would say is like those are being able to work with Lego is one of the joys of the job,
so
right?
cool.
Like that's pretty cool. That's pretty great. So it's everything. And it's the obvious things that we think of, but it's also, it's also a lot of like smaller, less obvious things. We've got some really good announcements. I'm trying to remember what we've announced and what we haven't. We've got some really great announcements on new products that'll be coming out here in the near future as well.
Cool. Hardware stuff?
The 2600 Plus is the most recent thing, but hardware is a big part of the business, and so I think people can expect more hardware announcements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can you explain for folks, not for me certainly, but the difference between the VCS and the 2600 Plus?
Sure. So the VCS, which was a product that was in development for quite a long time, and I believe launched in, I think it finally went out in late 2019,
okay.
I believe. I'm trying to think whether it's 2019 or 2020. Right around Christmas time. And it is essentially a platform. It's a Linux-based system that is really designed for like indie and retro titles. There's a lot of Atari titles on there, but there's also a really active homebrew community on that.
Okay.
And it's kind of like it's kind of morphed into a retro box that also has an active indie scene and is a distribution mechanism for a lot of Atari content.
Okay.
We will see some more hardware, some more things that will enable hardware for the VCS. We announced a strategic partnership with Polymega, which is just an amazing console. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Polymega. It's really cool. It basically, I've never seen anything like this. It can play almost all CD-based games. So PlayStation, Sega Saturn, Neo Geo CD, Sega CD, TurboGrafx CD, and then it also has modules. So to play Super Nintendo, Nintendo, N64, and Genesis. And then we signed a partnership, so they're going to make an Atari 2600, 7800 module. In addition to that, they've got a new device coming out that essentially it allows it to hook up to a computer and run Polymega on the computer. The VCS will be compatible with that.
Okay.
So people will be able to buy the new Polymega, which is significantly less expensive, and hook it up to their VCS and turn it into and run the Polymega app on there. So yeah.
How?
I didn't talk about 2600 Plus.
Oh yeah, I think you talked a little bit before.
Yeah, and the 2600 Plus is really a straight digital HDMI output console that plays 2600 and 7800 games.
Okay.
And we're going to continue to release a lot of new classic content for it.
Okay, gotcha. And that's the XP?
The XP line, yep.
That goes on the Plus.
So the XP line is one that we do personally, and then with our partner PlayOn, for some of the larger titles, they'll be actually releasing retail versions for some of these games and for some new titles too.
Okay.
So more to announce on that, and we've announced a few like Berserk Plus and Mr. Run and Jump.
Right.
And there's more to come.
Sweet. So probably when you're on the board, is that when you start realizing, it starts to sink in, like, there's a lot of history here I need to learn? Like where do you go for research? Because I'd imagine a lot of, I don't know, people aren't probably coming up to you on the street on a daily basis, but like you are expected to be an expert of Atari history.
Yeah, I would say that's
right.
fair.
A lot of it from before you were born. Like, how do you accomplish that? What's step one for just trying to dive into the world as you were on the board?
I think the board, the board, there is some of that obligation, but the board is more about holding executives accountable for financial performance.
Okay.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, they're my boss, and they hold me accountable to make sure that me and the other executives, that we're doing what we say we're going to do and that we're following through on what we say we're going to do. The community is what holds me accountable to the Atari history.
Okay.
Right? Like you said, you don't want to be out and about. You want to be on a podcast and somebody brings something up to you and you're like, I don't know if I didn't even know about that. I mean, it happens. But,
of course, yeah.
You don't want it to happen too often. And I think the beauty is that there's a lot of people who know about it. Al at AtariAge, for example, like I'm constantly learning from Al. I also, just on my own, just through my own research, knew quite a bit of Atari coming in. then I've constantly been expanding it and getting to know more of it. I mentioned Mike Mika over at Digital Eclipse. He's been a real mentor of mine in the industry and getting to know people better and also the history better. I mean, I always joke Mike has forgotten more than anyone knows about video games. So.
Definitely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so when you come in, do you have those moments of digging through the archives? Like, okay, what games do we fully own? Because you talk a lot about the past, but there's also the Infogrames era.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of that was licensed, right, in a confusing way. And so is it really a satisfying moment of getting in there and then getting to overlap? Like, what was I passionate about in my youth versus what do we own right now?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah. And in some cases, going to find some things like learning. Like I knew Atari had made 2600 and 5200 versions of Berserk. I then learned that we actually didn't own Berserk. And so going to acquire those rights, Berserk and Frenzy, was one of my favorite things that we had done last year. And
what is that process like? Is it somebody
it's different for everything? But in that case, the owner who became a friend had just had the rights for a long time and hadn't really done anything. And we just said, hey, we'd like to focus on this IP and to bring it back and to do some things with it. And we worked something out.
Okay. That sounds good.
Yeah.
What about that, the later period? The PS2 era, PS1 era.
Sure.
What do you own the rights for there?
Well, we had, so good question. And that is always kind of coming clear, but we do have the rights to some stuff through there. A lot of that we acquired in a recent acquisition of GTI, which was GT Interactive, which these were rights we had and we had lost in a bankruptcy. And then we were able to reacquire those at the start of the year.
That's interesting.
So probably the main IP in that would be Bubsy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's a good example of an IP you think people might like, and then people come out of the people who love Bubsy, and they'll swear by the first game, mix on the second. There's all these kind of weird. The third one's sort of it's notorious. It's kind of an infamous game, but people will be like, it's not as bad as people say, and so it's just a funny series, and I think it deserves. I think eventually, a good Bubsy game needs to be made. But so there's a lot of IP that we acquired from that time frame in that acquisition.
Is Bubsy number one? Really, realistically, if you were to announce a new game reviving any of the IP in that GTI stuff, would Bubsy be the biggest head turn?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's some other kind of fun thing. Hardball, Demolition Racer. Those are a couple that, a lot of people like. But I think Bubsy more than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you don't have to reveal what you're doing, but in theory, you'd keep your eye open for who's a good indie platforming team that might be interested in reviving Bubsy.
I think if there's good indie platforming teams and they want to reach out, we'd certainly be interested in hearing those things.
And they should reach out to...
They can reach out to the General Atari. You can go to the site and reach out. We watch it.
Okay.
We'll get it.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, but I think the key there is to make sure it's interesting, innovative, tongue-in-cheek. The last thing anyone wants is a really generic platformer these days. So, how do you make a great game while also acknowledging that Bubsy has been in less than desirable things and making that funny and fun? It's an interesting challenge and somebody's going to crack it.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So Demolition, what was the other one there?
Oh, Demolition Racer, yeah. Hardball, which is a really famous baseball series.
Okay.
Those would be some examples of the IP from that time period.
It's a weird comparison, I'm sure, but it just feels like you have so much IP and so many ideas of what you could do with it, and different teams, I'm sure they would love to have access to it. It reminds me a little bit of Embracer, right? Where you break down all the IP they own. It's oh my God, it's mind-boggling to try and understand, but it's just, there's only so much time, there's only so much money for development teams.
Totally.
We have to be really selective. And that's the challenge, is that a big part of your job is stressing about where the resources are going for this type of thing, or is that even layers below you and you're worried about?
No. That definitely is a big part of my job.
Okay.
You brought up Embracer, right?
Yeah.
Embracer's an amazing company. They've done amazing things. I know they're in hot water in the news right now, but I'm constantly, it is amazing what they built over there, despite all the things that are happening. That said, we're also seeing what happens if, you overcommit on some projects and the funding for that is contingent on the previous projects. So we try to take a more financially conservative approach to things and make sure that there's either that we feel really confident in the success of the project, or that it's not going to really damage us or be existentially threatening if it misses, or on the other side that we have a partner that we can work on it with. So you're right, there is some commonalities. I think where there's differences is we try to stick to a vein, which is retro, innovative retro. A lot of the IP acquisition, not all of it, like the GTI was different, but that we had some historical precedents there. But a lot of it is based around that golden age of video games. So Atari, Coleco in television time period. We bought the M Network games from Intellivision in this past year too, which was a collection of 2,600 games that Intellivision had made back in the day. And what we use all that content. So, we do remastered versions, like in the example of Berserk. We use it for licensing to keep our licensing portfolio fresh. So it can help us in licensing. It can help us in hardware. We can use it to make new games. And that's really how we de-risk it. So for those acquisitions, we usually know what we want to use it for.
Okay.
Before we ever,
Yeah. I mean, are there big discussions internally every time a big news story breaks about Embracer troubles, layoffs? Team 17 has published some great games. Still, they were hit by layoffs very recently.
Yeah.
I mean, is that just everything's a lesson? Do you all digest the industry? And I'm curious, like from just this year alone, where there's been so many industry layoffs. I mean, epic, for Christ's sake, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, Embracer gets a lot of that heat because of, closing Volition and which is a real tragedy. Since that was a Midwest studio, that one hits close to home. There's not a lot of them left. But like most studios have had layoffs. That's not just an Embracer thing. Most tech has had layoffs. I think for us to think of it as a video game based thing is actually to not see it for what it is, which is an industry reorientation. And that happens when, I remember watching the annual reports, watching these presentations, and people would talk about, they'd show headcount tripling over, from 2019 to 2022. That's probably not sustainable, right? If you've tripled your headcount in that period of time, and not just Embracer, lots of large companies significantly increase their headcount. And I think this is a readjusting to a changing environment. I think if there's any lesson, it's that, I think we should be more careful about hiring. I think no one wanted to miss out on that COVID pop.
Sure.
And everybody thought that was going to create a new plateau of where we were going to grow from. So if you look at where we are today versus where we were in 2019, we are exactly on the trend line for the industry growth that people said we would be on. The difference is we're down from where we were in 2022 and 2021 because of COVID. And everybody, the narrative was, COVID has changed things. When COVID's done, this just popped that line up and we're going to grow from there.
Right.
We didn't. We still have grown versus 2019 pretty significantly, but compared to this, COVID was a bubble, but people responded to it like it was permanent.
Sure.
And I think that's where things get rocky.
And you saw a lot of that on the board. I mean, you were coming in kind of 2020 on the Atari board?
We did not expand greatly. In fact, I think anyone, when they come into a company that is trying to find its footing early on, the worst thing you can do is do a bunch of hiring. So, we were just getting the house in order. I mean, I wouldn't even say we were putting up, we weren't even, putting up the foundation. We were putting in the foundation. We weren't even putting up the beams or anything yet. So,
but did you feel any pressure? I mean, were there discussions about look, I know we're still building the foundation, but this seems like the time to acquire, expand?
Not so much from the board, but from the outside for sure. That was the advice from, anyone you talk to externally. That's what they would tell you.
Huh.
but the board has been, they're really patient and thoughtful, and they have a long-term view of the company. And I think everybody knew that if we had expanded at that point in time, we just weren't in a place to properly, it's not so much to just want to expand. You have to have the infrastructure in place. You have to have the team maturity to be able to do that. And we weren't anywhere near that at that point in time.
Sure. And so now, like 30 people or so at Atari? Or what's the overall?
Yeah, I think we're right around there, maybe a little bit more. And then Nightdive as well, which probably adds about another 20.
Really? It's just 20 at Nightdive, really?
Well, there's contractors and there's people that sub in and out on projects, but I don't want to speak to the full size of Nightdive, but probably around that on the employee side. And then and there's more, right? There's more contractors and things that come in as projects.
Sure.
As these things are through in various stages. There's probably more than that. And then we have a lot of external dev teams that we don't own, that are external dev teams from us that we contract with, that are working on games for us at any given time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the strategy to kind of get through this rough period in the industry is let's stay small, conservative, safe bets.
Yeah, I think doing things that we think we can do better than other people.
Okay.
Not getting lost in the mass, not doing something that has to compete with something that looks like everything else, finding what works and sticking to that and building on those things.
Yeah.
So, finding what we're good at and what we can do better. I think that's how you survive periods like this.
Yeah. I'd imagine, not knowing anything again, that the movie licensing world has to be, I'm just imagining a scene where people on the board are like, you idiots, give us a Mario movie. It's right there, please.
Well, movies take a long time to make.
Right.
But
that seems like a natural thing after 2023 and the results.
Yeah, it's been a big year for brands and movies, Mario and Barbie. I think the challenge, though, is, that industry also has overexpanded during COVID.
Right.
And has also been in retreat. It's just coming out of a strike, so everything was on hold during I don't even think it's formally out of it, but it's winding down. Everything's been on hold during that strike. So,
do you get to hear the pitches? Do you get to hear people come up and be like, okay, Asteroids movie, which I think has been in development for 20 years. I feel like I've seen that headline every year.
Well, Asteroids, Centipede, yeah, you definitely you see all and hear all the pitches, and it's all really it's a super fun part of the job. But it's easy to conceptualize these. It's a lot harder to bring it to reality. That's a learning that I have, but I do hope that we can make some great movies and television shows as the years go on.
You think within 5 years?
I can't give any numbers on that one, but
okay. Major Havoc is sitting right there. That feels
that's a bit of a deep cut. But
okay, really. Speaking of Major Havoc, what I really want to talk to you about is Cybots.
Cybots.
Yeah, have you played Cybots? Do you know Cybots?
Oh, yeah. No, I haven't.
Do you pronounce it? Is there a better way to pronounce it within Atari?
I misheard you there for a second. No, I haven't played Cybots. Do I need to play it?
You absolutely need to play. I played it for the first time this year because I really enjoyed Major Havoc. Again, there's one that I found on the Atari 50 collection. Like, this rules.
Major Havoc's great.
And then I was looking for, did they ever do anything with this? Other ways to play it? And then, of course, Wikipedia is like, well, technically, Cybots from 1987 is in the Major Havoc universe. I was like, what is this? I played it with my, 9-year-old nephew on just a MAME cabinet we have. It's so good.
Really?
It's Gauntlet, but if it was sci-fi, third-person shooter RPG.
All right. Noted.
Hey man, I don't want to tell you what to do, but
we got a recharge deep cut coming up, so maybe Cybots makes an appearance at some point.
That's it. If you got to make a bet for your first AAA production, I don't know. But yeah, AAA stuff. It's too expensive. It's too much of a gamble, but it's interesting. Is that the right way to frame where you guys are at?
I don't know that. I think that's a fair framing. Okay. I think also AAA is there's a place for it, and it's great. I'm just not sure that that's what we're looking to deliver right now. Sure. I think we'd rather deliver something that's really tailored to a more specific community. Because ultimately for AAA to work, it has to appeal to a mass amount of people. And Atari 50 does that. So there are exceptions, right? Atari 50 does that, but it's appealing to them through something different than, you know, than like a game concept or a gameplay, right? So for us, that's really the key. Like I think trying to figure out, let's use Nightdive, even the System Shock remake. That game is an amazing game, reviewed really well. It just got nominated for a Golden Joystick, but it also is a little niche. It doesn't hold your hand. It's not, you know, it's pretty obtuse at times. You're like, I mean, I'm sure anybody who's played it got lost and like has to figure out how the hell to get through certain parts of the game, and that's a good example of something where we want to make games like that. Make games that are kind of challenging and interesting, because when you read those Nightdive reviews, there's very few 7s. They're like 9s and 10s, right, or they're 5s. And I want to make games like that. Like that's great, because people are feeling something, you know, with really larger, and not always, but a lot of AAA games, it's going to be a little less controversial, or a little less, you can't push the edges there. You got to sand off the rough edges to make it more appealing and things like that.
Yeah. Do you look through the history a lot of the recent past just to figure out, you know, like what was a direction that still could be relevant, but we know not to go down that road? I mean, just something like Asteroids Outpost, I think of, which is from like maybe 2012, 2013, something like that. Like that felt like a swing that you could see somebody making the case now of like, okay, let's try and make a survival Asteroids game here. Maybe.
I think really when we look at the past, the only thing that I probably still look at to learn from, I mean, the team is radically different. You know, there's some great people that are still in the team, but as far as like the executive leadership goes, that team is entirely turned over.
Okay.
But I think probably where we look and say, hey, we can learn from this is on the free to play side. That market's changed dramatically. Yeah. You know, where it was in 2017 or 18 or 19 is not the same today. And free to play is a good example of something that is really in a tough spot, because advertising revenue's down, which pushes revenue to the games. It's kind of it's like an unraveling circle a little bit. You know, advertising revenue's down, which means you make less from advertising revenue, which means you can spend less on advertising revenue, which means you make less on advertising revenue. At the same time, you have to spend more to target people, which makes sense. But, you know, because of the data privacy things, you have much less targeted ads. So you have to spend a lot more for efficacy. And I think that's an example of an industry that's still it really shot up quickly. And I think and you know, the Unity announcement as well, that hits that industry even harder. I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation on that side. And so we have a successful game, Roller Coaster Tycoon Touch, which we very much support. That's not going to change. But outside of that, we probably won't be expanding too much on the free to play side, unless it's something in that Roller Coaster Tycoon universe.
Yeah, I guess that seems like a good avenue for that. Yeah.
But that was a learning. And I think looking at the previous decisions, they make sense at the time they were made, but I think we can also avoid future mistakes by looking at that.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'll get you out of here. You don't have to spend all day in this basement. It's a nice Minnesotan day.
No, it's great. We're covering everything here. We got it all.
It's fascinating. I don't know if you know that. Let's see. We can close on biggest geek out moment you've had personally since entering the game industry. Has there been one moment that stood out to you for just ultimate fan geek out? I assume you go to a lot of events, meet a lot of people.
I'm not exactly sure what it means. Is it my ultimate?
Yeah, well, meeting somebody
I'm
who
friends
works
with
on a
Nolan
game
now, which is great. Yeah. Right, literally before coming over here, I was on a call with Nolan, and we talk, you know, regularly, at least like once a month, and I consider him a friend. And
what do you talk about?
You know, we talk about everything. Sometimes we'll talk about life. Sometimes we'll talk about personal things. But most of the time, we talk about ideas. We talk about, you know, I'll pose questions to him around, hey, what was your process for this? How did you come up with this? You know, I've been working on a book. I've been writing a book in my spare time, and I was asking him, for example, on like he's written a number of books now, and saying, hey, what was your process?
This is a memoir type thing?
No, definitely
Oh, really?
not.
Oh.
No, I've got a lot more to, could you imagine how like,
hey man, I don't know.
I'm like, I'm not even 40 and I'm like writing a memoir about like at the beginning of the journey of Atari. Like that would be, I would groan if I would eye roll myself if I did that. But, no, but I'll come back on the show and talk to you all about it when it gets a little closer.
A novel type thing?
No, it's nonfiction.
Okay.
It's a little bit. It's an examination of art and some of the things going on in the video game industry, but the media industry as a whole.
So Nolan has some good advice for you on that front, though.
Yeah, so that would be a good example. But we talk about everything. We talk about he's got a lot of great stories and anecdotes, and it's just fun. Like we've developed a really close relationship. It was one of those where I met him. I'm like, yeah, he's probably not going to be that great of a guy. And then we were talking to him like, oh, Nolan's great. like there's this interview of us meeting. That was the first time I'd met Nolan, was to do that interview. And we just kept it going.
Oh, that's fun.
Whenever I'm out in LA, we grab dinner and we talk on the phone regularly. And I think that's probably the biggest, what started as a geek out moment and has grown into a friendship.
And is he fully independent from Atari at this point? This is just...
Yes, he is. Okay. I mean, he's a strategic advisor. He's actually a formal strategic advisor for Atari.
So he's on the payroll.
As a consultant.
Okay.
But beyond that, he's independent of Atari. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, that's cool. That's as good as you can get.
Yeah,
it's got to be weird nostalgic for him, right? Talking to you about unpacking all these issues and...
I think so. Yeah. I think probably at times it's strange for him. I think for him, Atari, he had a lot of he had Chuck E. Cheese. He did a lot after Atari though. Atari was like a really short time in his life in the grand scheme of things. I think he founded it and sold it in less than 10 years.
That's wild.
I know, right? Because you think of Nolan, you just associate him with Atari. I think he not only founded it and sold it in less than 10 years, I think he had departed the company in less than 10 years. So anyone who knows the life cycle of a business knows that founding and selling a company in under 10 years is pretty rare. Like it's rare that it goes that fast. Like it's usually a 10-year stint minimum. And so for something to grow that much and to become that successful that quickly and then to exit it, and then to be associated with it forever after that, that's probably pretty surreal if I had to guess.
Is there one core piece of advice, one message he keeps driving home about how to run this thing?
I think creativity first.
Okay.
Lead with creativity, innovation. Yeah. I mean,
innovation. You get
the problem is now it's like a little bit his old I think the tagline he had for Atari back in the day was innovative leisure. Problem is now innovation is such a cliche word that if somebody has it as a core value, it's almost counter to that. Like if you use innovation as your core value, you're probably not innovative. So that's it's like an ironic thing to use. But I think, in the most classical sense of the word, Nolan is very, very creative and innovative and always pushing that. Also, like I wouldn't say he comes out and says this, but he seems that he has a lot of fun with everything he does.
Okay.
And I always leave a conversation with Nolan being like, at the end of the day, like that's the point of this, to like do something meaningful. Yeah, we're making mistakes, but on the whole, I think we're doing a good job and we're trying to find joy in it. We're trying to find joy in the process. And
you're feeling confident about sticking with Atari for the long run?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
This is a big commitment. Yep.
Could you retire from Atari?
You mean at some point in time in the distant future? Retire?
Yeah, I imagine you're not going to retire at 40. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I could see doing this for the rest of my career. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, hey, anything you want to plug before we sign off, man?
Well, I think Turok 3 coming out in November.
Yeah.
Dark Forces coming out in February. And Berserk Recharged coming out in Haunted House coming out the end of this month.
Yeah.
And Berserk Recharged coming out in December. I'm forgetting RCT Adventures Deluxe on consoles in November.
There we go. You're a pro. Thanks for swinging by. Appreciate it. I'm sorry I bastardized your logo on the blackboard.
It was a nice gesture. Yeah. I appreciated the gesture. I thought maybe we were going to be recorded here because I saw it in the background. I was like, oh, that was that was thoughtful.
Yeah, I do what I can. Thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for watching or listening to this interview. There are plenty more in the playlist for MinnMax interviews. Did you know that this was a video, by the way?
No, I had no idea.
Sorry, I probably should have told you.
They told me it wasn't a video.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Is it getting posted?
Oh, yeah. But you're looking good. What are you talking about? You're casual. You're good. The point is there are more video interviews on MinnMax's YouTube channel, so you can all check those out. Subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed it or help support it directly on Patreon. Cool. Thanks so much, folks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. If you thought, hey, this video wasn't bad, well, there's a whole lot more like it on MinnMax's YouTube channel. Please help us out by subscribing to our channel and checking out the MinnMax Show podcast, also available on your favorite podcast app, the best, most thorough discussion about games on the internet with the deepest dive, our monthly community trivia show with prizes called Trivia Tower, and a whole lot more. Thanks so much for your support, everybody. All you gotta do is click that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it.